Hello, everyone. Welcome to the KPC podcast. I'm Karsan Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
Today, we're going to be talking about the incident that happened in Florida last Wednesday, but we're also going to be talking about a bit lighter news. We have an update on the gerrymandering case in Pennsylvania, and today's President's Day, which the bad news about President's Day is that we still have to go to school and work. So,
unfortunately.
Unfortunately. But before we get started... Actually, we're going to get started right now. So, starting off with the Florida shooting. So, do you want to speak first on this, or do you... Go ahead and speak first. I'll have you speak first.
There's so many things that we can talk about this. What I really want to voice on this shooting is that it feels different. I think that not only because of the footage that was released that students were taking, one video in particular where they started in the classroom and you can see a body laying on the ground with blood around it, and then they move to the hallway and there's another body on the ground with blood.
Do you have that video? Because I have not seen that.
It's probably on, I saw it on Twitter, if you want to search it. But,
yeah, I'm going to actually search that right now.
And just the other videos of people waiting in classrooms and you can hear the gunshots. That, to me, made it so much more real. You know, when you hear about another shooting or you see a headline about another shooting, you just kind of take it as is. Mm-hmm. But in a way, that video put me there, and it made it so much more real to understand that people really did go through that. And also, another reason why this shooting feels so different is because the students have been so inspirational and have been voicing their opinions and their strength as classmates together, and they're banding together and they are begging for change, and they've already planned for I think it's like a walkout that they're planning on March 24th maybe is the date.
March 24th is.
And that's awesome. I just don't think that I can't remember a time where after every shooting everyone either says, if you're, a lot of Republicans say, this isn't the time to talk about this. This is time for prayers and thoughts. And this time, the students are actually saying, and you can see it in responses to, Donald Trump's tweet or, Tommy Lauren, our favorite person, They are my classmates got shot in front of me. This is the time to talk about it. So that's kind of my overall take on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a very different perspective on everything that's been happening. I agree. I think my biggest problem with people on the right is that I think whenever a shooting happens, you need to give it at least 24 hours for information to come out. I remember when I first read the headline, a very deadly school shooting, and I thought, okay, look at this tomorrow because you're going to have a lot more information. More information did come out. However, more people stuck to the whole, well, we need to wait for more information. We need to wait. And I do agree that now is the time that we need to act. My problem with a lot of this stuff, people are promoting gun control, and even the students, they were talking about how now's the time to act. We need to do this. But my problem is that they haven't proposed anything specific. I don't know what
They're not the legislators, though.
Right, and that's my thing.
They're not in control.
People are putting them on the pedestal as if they are the legislators and saying that they are somehow as credible as politicians. There was an article I saw where people want to limit or reduce the voting age to 16 because of this incident. And I don't think that is an appropriate way to go about something like this. And I don't think that we need to take their word as them being experts on the situation. They didn't, of course, being a victim, they have a set of eyes and they were able to see this incident in a way that no one else was able to see it. But I don't think that we need to pretend as if they now know everything about gun regulation. But
I don't think they're saying that they know everything about gun regulation. I think that they're using this as a platform to say that this has got to stop. They're not saying these are the steps that we need to take as a country. I think that they're more so saying these are the steps that we should take to make this not happen again, because they don't want that to happen anymore to anyone else.
Yeah, well, I'm more talking specifically about the people's responses to them, not what the kids are saying specifically. Of course, they're entitled to their own view on what they want to say. One thing that kind of did strike me the wrong way, one of them said something about like if you support the NRA, you're supporting these children killers. And the NRA has putting people who support the NRA in the same boat as children murderers. I think that's wrong, and I don't agree with that at all. I know a lot of people who own guns and who don't support killing children. I just thought that was asinine.
I think they're what I've been seeing a lot of is on Twitter, these students or other people will quote tweet, like a senator or a representative will say, thoughts and prayers, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then they'll just say the amount of money that they get from the NRA. And that's the reason why we cannot push gun reform, is because so many representatives are like being choked by the NRA, and they refuse to act on it because they get all this money. And I think that's the connection there. I'm not necessarily agreeing that the term child killers is correct, but I completely agree with these kids when they say that if you're voting or if you get money from the NRA, you are letting this problem happen over and over and over again.
Yeah, and I saw something on Twitter. I have the tweet right up. This is from Ben Shapiro saying that from 1998 to 2017, the NRA spent $200 million on all political activities, but unions alone spent $1.7 billion on politics only in the 2016 cycle alone. So I don't think the NRA's financial support is as big as we lead it out to be. I mean, $200 million, that's a lot of money, but over the span of 20 years, it's... I kind of wonder how much of that is actually... it doesn't seem as big as I thought it would be. I would have expected at least $1 billion within 20 years. So that's kind of where I see this disagreement. But what's more important about this, specifically for me, is that people start exchanging ideas and what we can do to prevent things like this from happening. And one thing I don't like is when I go on Twitter and I see people, whether they're on the left or the right, people on the right say, no, just leave our guns alone. And it's like, well, what's your idea? What are you doing to prevent this? Same thing on the left, who say, get rid of guns. For what cost? I read this article on National Review, which was this had a very good piece on it. It's called A Gun Control Measure Conservatives Should Consider. And this is a Democratic gun control view, which I had no idea about this, but I don't think I'm going to actually get down to the nitty gritty of it. I'm just going to kind of summarize it. But basically the idea is that the way that restraining orders work, they implement that same idea when it comes to guns.
I think I was actually going to touch on this later. I think keep going.
Okay.
This is something that I saw too.
But it was talking about, they were called GVROs, which are gun violence restraining orders. And actually, I'm going to read a little bit from this. It says, while there are various versions of these laws working their way through the states, California passed a GVRO statute in 2014, and it went into effect in 2016. Broadly speaking, they permit a spouse, parent, sibling, or person living with a troubled individual to petition a court for an order enabling law enforcement to temporarily take that individual's gun right away. And I think putting the decision in the people who are directly around those who have the guns is much more effective than hoping that the federal government's going to do their job, because the FBI...
They have so many other things to worry about.
The FBI has completely dropped the ball on this and 4 other shootings in the past 4 years. In fact, something from here, it says 4 horrific mass shootings in 4 years where federal systems failed has cost more than 100 lives. That's 100 more lives than we need. And yeah, I think the FBI dropping the ball on this court specifically, I was so surprised that they didn't do anything about this, because whenever I was in high school, I went to high school in this very small town. These 2 kids, these idiot kids, sent an email to President Obama threatening to kill him. And by the end of the day, the CIA was there and interviewing these kids. They were under federal investigation. And, they're not the smartest kids in the world. So I could only imagine them to say Obama, you suck, LOL, where this guy has been monitored throughout, I think it's been months, and they just didn't do anything about it. And I think putting the power into the local government, putting the power into the people who actually watch them. And if you look at these interviews, the kids, they say, yeah, we expected this kid to shoot up the school. Or, you know what I mean? They're like, we weren't surprised he was the one who did it. And he was also a part of a white nationalist movement. And there's just so many factors that made them red flags to seeing this. And I don't know, the fact that the FBI couldn't do it makes me hesitant on when people say that we should trust the government to limit our guns. That's,
You bring up a good point. I think that giving this decision to the states is a really good idea to start out, because each state is so different too.
Yeah.
More conservative states aren't gonna want gun reform, but I read up on that too. I think only 5 states have it, but I think it's a great idea. That's definitely something that I think should happen, but I also think that there should be more steps as well. I've always said on gun reform that I get so annoyed and angered when people say, don't take away our guns, it's the Second Amendment. Because to that, my response is, are you a sane person? If you think you can pass a background check, don't be worried about me taking your gun. Don't be worried about anyone taking your gun. Have your frickin' gun.
Right.
But if you should not have a gun and you're worried about passing a background check, then we should be taking your guns. Like, if you can pass a background check, go, like, have your gun. Like, I understand that some people feel safer with guns in the house. Some people, like my dad, he goes hunting. You know, he has, I think, probably like 2 rifles in the house, maybe. But also, why would we need our AR-15s or whatever they're called? Like, what do you do with that? Well, I don't know anything about guns, but what's the purpose?
Well, I know that AR-15s, the biggest misconception is that people think that AR stands for assault rifle, but it stands for Armalite rifle, and it does fall under the same category as hunting rifles. So that's why people worry once we start getting rid of AR-15s, who's to say we're not going to get rid of these hunting rifles as well? Because you can use an AR-15 to hunt. But no, I agree. I do think more needs to be done. And I think my biggest critique to a lot of conservatives is that they don't realize that there are ways to implement safety that don't involve restricting these gun rights. And I think something that I kind of just thought about this today, but so I know that President Trump wants to eliminate the welfare program, and I looked up how much that costs. It's $1.3 trillion. So let's say that he ended it or cut it in half. The government would have, $500 billion or a whole $1 trillion. And I think that money should be used to, let's see where I wrote this, is to put funding towards education and having armed guards in these schools. I think 1 armed guard per 100 to 300 students, depending on the size of it, would be a good measure, especially when it comes to the safety of our kids. We shouldn't be compromising that. And if there's any way we can have fundings to make sure our kids are protected, I'm all for that. And I also thought of a way that maybe, like for teachers, whenever they're applying for their job, they could have a potential raise if they are certified to carry a firearm. So that would incentivize teachers to make sure that they're safely trained, don't just give Mr. Fox a gun, even though he is 100 years old and falls asleep teaching. I mean, give people who are trained, consistently trained, and can protect the students. I think those would be really good measures. And another thing, I was listening to Ben Shapiro's podcast. He has his own news website called The Daily Wire, and he said that he's banning the use of mentioning shooters' names and showing their faces, because one of the reasons they do this is a lot of them are inspired by the Columbine shooting. Yeah, and so not allowing these people to have a platform of fame, which I think is my biggest critique about the media, is you open the news, all you see is his face, and then you see his name, and I think not making them famous at all would be a step in the right direction, as well as making sure that there is security at our school. And another thing too, whenever there wasn't a busy day, they do this at our school all the time. They would just send a cop to the school to make sure, just walk around, make sure everything's fine. So I think there are a lot of ways that we can make sure that we have the safety that the kids need. I don't know.
Did you know that they had armed guards at the school?
Yes, they had one for 3,000 students.
I don't think that armed guards, or I hate the idea of teachers having guns. I will admit I am a person that guns make me so uncomfortable. But my high school did have, we had a sheriff that was always at our school. And I think that's different, but I don't feel safer when I see, like, the people that walk on KU's campus, like the police officers, but they're like, look like they're SWAT team members. Yeah. When I see that, like, I get scared. Like, I immediately think something's going on, something's wrong. Like, why are they here? Why do they need to be here? Mm-hmm. And I understand the logic, and I understand the support behind wanting armed guards. I think I'm more so for that than having teachers have guns, because I just think that's adding to the problem. I think that so many more incidents could happen. A student could take over, like, try to fight it, like, little things.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Because especially if a teacher, he may be, and this is you bring up a good point, because I thought about that. If a student is stronger than the teacher and can disarm the teacher, yeah, that's a lot of trouble. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of factors to play into, and I don't agree with giving every student a gun, but every student a gun.
Let's not do
teacher,
that.
Yeah, let's not do that. Every teacher, but I don't know. I figured those were just some ideas to have. I think it's more productive for people to at least bring something to the table than just be like, this sucks because this sucks.
There's so many ideas out there. There's so many ways that we could take even baby steps toward this. And the problem is, like, so many representatives, I feel, refuse to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it when it seems like so many people are increasingly becoming aware of the problem and are more likely to say, well, yeah, I would support, like, smaller gun reform.
Yeah.
And a lot of people bring up the Australia gun reform, which I had read a little bit of that last semester because that was after the Las Vegas shooting, I believe. I read into it because everyone was talking about it then. And I mean, it paints a very, very wonderful picture that, they haven't had a shooting since that. But I think they had, if I remember correctly, they basically took guns from everyone, and they, like, you had to, like, sell your gun or something. So I probably am not voicing this correctly, but basically what they did, I think, is take everyone's guns away. And I'm not saying that that's what we need to do at all. I mean, yeah, that would take away the problem. Get rid of the guns, get rid of being able to shoot up a school. But I think there's just so many more options that we could take. One thing that really, really has been getting at me this time and the past shootings is the mental health cover-up. I don't know.
Explain that, yeah.
Trump especially tweets, and even all the news articles are always saying he was mentally disturbed, mental illness. Trump spoke to the press conference after the shooting when he first spoke about it. He didn't even speak about it, really, because he didn't even mention gun violence. He didn't mention the word gun, I don't think. He said mental illness. We need to solve mental illness, which is something that you cannot solve.
Right.
There are so many people with mental illness.
Yeah.
And him saying we need to, people that have mental health issues are the problem. That's feeds the stigma, the stereotype. Right. It baffles me because people with depression or anxiety, like stuff like that. I mean, there's so many different types of mental health issues, and you can't just name it all and then say they're lunatics. And put those people that are lunatics, quote unquote, in the same
boat as someone who's depressed. There are different types of mental illnesses that will make you passive or aggressive.
Yeah, and it's not a cover-up. Talk about the real problem here.
Yeah.
Talk about how they're getting guns. The underlying problem, I'm going on a rampage here. This is the part that makes me so mad. He says mental health is a problem. We need to, give money to mental health issues and talk about those. Okay, so, yeah, mental health, someone that is, quote-unquote, a lunatic and has mental health issues, that pushed this person and so many other people to go and kill people or to shoot up a school. How'd they get the guns? Is gun reform not the underlying problem there? I mean, if they had those issues, how they were able to get a gun with their issue that they're saying needs to be solved. You can't just snap your fingers and give them meds and solve it. Yeah, medication helps for these things, but, like, it's not how you're going to solve this issue. Right. It's just not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've seen the mentally ill argument thrown around a lot, and I think people use it they use it too much. I've seen it even used as, like, a justification as to why this happened. Whether you're mentally ill or not, that there's absolutely nothing that can ever justify somebody ending the life of an innocent person. And another thing I think is that, the mental illness, good God, I totally just blanked on what I was going to say. Crap. I don't remember what I was going to say. I think I was going along the lines of it should not be, like you said, there are multiple aspects of mental health. It shouldn't be stigmatized as, oh, you're depressed? Well, let's make sure you don't shoot somebody type thing. I think it's an important factor that plays into the reason why they did it, but people should be smart enough to know that if someone's mentally ill, they're not just going to start killing people. And I think treatment is something that needs to be pushed for. Maybe that's what Trump was saying. He just worded it poorly. Like he words like 90% of what he says poorly. But I read a statistic somewhere. It was like 75% of shooters have a mental health issue. And then 50% of those shooters also show signs that they basically tease the shooting they're going to do before they do it. And I don't know. I think both of those show that, one, we need to do something about the mental health of a lot of everybody, but I think more specifically young men, because that's who these shooters are. They're young men. I think they need to be looked at more. They need to be treated for, taken care of. And then the next thing is to have the GVRO, gun violence restraining orders. I think those need to be implemented because I think, if you look at the same threat, and the FBI looked at the shooter's YouTube account where he said he was going to be a shooter, and they said, whatever, where the people around him were thinking, oh my God, this guy is very dangerous. I'm going to believe the people who actually live with the shooter over the FBI saying, look at that comment. You know what I mean? And so, I think there's a lot of things that come into play. While I don't agree with the stances that the students have taken, I do agree that I think it's good that they're at least taking a stand. It shows that they're obviously very passionate about the issue. They don't want this issue to persist any longer. And I think people bringing a lot of different ideas to the table is starting to push things in the right direction, if only we can actually get some form of policy reflecting these ideas as opposed to just yelling.
Yeah. So. I am so excited for Trump to interact with these students.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for the lawmakers that will probably visit to interact with them too, because that is going to be a very, very interesting event, I think. And part of me thinks that he's going to be a coward and not do it or find a way around it.
Yeah.
But I would like to have at least minimal faith in the president of the United States to do the right thing and to care about people other than himself. Like the tweet of him saying that,
the
if
FBI
the FBI
was too busy.
Unbelievable.
That was insane.
Who...
I thought it was
that's just a completely different thing though you can go into. I
could see that being a tweet from Alec Baldwin's Trump parody account, but not from the actual president. I thought that was absolutely insane. But are there any other things you want to say about this, or should we go ahead and move on?
Let's move on to some lighter.
All right. So luckily we're going to be ending this show with a bit of brighter news. So first of all, it's President's Day. And what does that actually mean? Well, I did some quick Googling. And thanks to the History Channel, the website, not the actual TV channel, they have a great article talking about President's Day. It says President's Day is an American holiday celebrated on the third Monday in February today. Originally established in 1885 in recognition of President George Washington, it is still officially called Washington's birthday by the federal government. Traditionally celebrated on February 22nd, Washington's actual day of birth, the holiday became popularly known as President's Day after it was moved as part of 1971's Union Reform Monday Holiday Act, an attempt to create more 3-day weekends for the nation's workers. So, if you didn't catch that, basically we used to actually celebrate George Washington's birthday. Then we moved it to the third Monday of February, which also revolves around the birthdays of George Washington, William Henry Harrison, Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan. So it kind of celebrates a bunch of U.S. presidents, but and to incentivize workers to have another 3-day weekend, which I thought was actually kind of funny that was their motive to celebrating the president. George Washington, the man who basically tirelessly worked his whole life to create this land of freedom we want to celebrate it by not doing anything. And I also thought about this, like Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He wouldn't want us taking the day off. He would want us working. Wouldn't you think so? I mean, I'm not going to argue with it if I get the day off. So. I don't mind having the day off, but I think in respect for him, he would want us doing something. Same thing with George Washington, which a couple interesting things. I was telling you about this, but I'll tell the two people who listen to this. He did not want to be the president, which I think that attitude is one of the best attitudes when it comes to being the first president, because the people of America were basically wanting George Washington to be another king, which the reason they left the British was because, I don't know my American history that much. The reason they left is because they didn't want to be ruled by the king. So I think it took a guy who really didn't want to work to start this nation. And what was interesting about it is, I know that the founding fathers, back in the 1700s, slavery was a popular practice by a lot of people. But I learned this about him. I think he was probably the least racist. He put in his will that once he passed away, he wanted all of his slaves to go free and be citizens. And once he passed, his wife basically took that part out of his will so they could still be slaves. So George Washington's wife was not as nice as we thought she was.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
And then we have another thing to talk about. Hannah is going to talk about gerrymandering.
All right, the good stuff. Actually, it's terrible. I hate gerrymandering and we should stop it. But today, Pennsylvania's Supreme Court issued a new district map to replace the last one that was in place for the last 3 congressional elections. I got that from the Huffington Post, as well as other couple of news sources that reported on it as well. So this, just looking at the map, you all should look at it. It's a story by Sam Levine. He put in a tweet of his that compares the two maps, and it is just, I showed Karsan this because it's the first one. If you know what gerrymandering looks like, or maps that have that look like, it's crazy. It's all over the place. There's districts going in districts and touching like 4 other districts, and then this new one has pretty clean cut lines, goes a lot by the counties. I don't know. I think that there's fewer districts. No, there's not. That doesn't make sense. This one doesn't. This one goes from, okay, no, there's 17 and 18. Okay, we're good. They have the same amount because that makes sense. But yeah, so I'm very excited about this because I hope that it will urge other states to kind of go in this direction as well. I believe that this map was drawn after the Republican lawmakers and the Pennsylvania governor failed to come up with an agreement by a February 15th deadline. So I guess they couldn't decide on one. And so the Supreme Court made one, which is great and no longer is hard to look at. But it'll be interesting because I think the Pennsylvania's old congressional map had a good advantage for the Republicans. So we will see how that will change.
Is this the first state to end gerrymandering?
I mean, it's not really like they implemented a law saying they can't do it.
Right.
But I'm sure there's been other cases of maps that have been so janky that they need to be redrawn. I think they have to be redrawn every 10 years, I want to say, after the census. But I'd have to look into that.
So then the significance of this is that hopefully this tactic of playing fair, so to speak, is going to trickle to the other 49 states. Right,
because the court said this is what the HuffPost said, it's so partisan it violates the state's constitution, is what the court said.
Ooh, okay.
So I am sure the other states pretty much violate the Constitution as well, if that's what this one is.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting. Yeah, we'll give some updates on how that plays out. And I guess that's all we have for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we will be back on Wednesday with our regular newscast.